Welcome back to my channel. For my last Herstory Month video, I'm going to tell you about an insane human being. I had a woman I was going to do. However, when she came across my desk, I was like, yeah, I gotta do her like now. You'll understand. Today, let me introduce you to a woman who gave basically the middle finger to the Nazis during World War II while being inside the concentration camp of Auschwitz to deliver Jewish babies. Stanisława Leszczyńska. Let's get started. Okay, y'all, we're in Poland today. So there's going to be Polish names, Polish places, Polish words. So me and my mouth are going to do our best to pronounce these words and names. And if I butcher these words, because I more than likely will, I am deeply sorry. Don't come after me. I'm an American and I have a stammer. So English alone is hard for me to do. I'm gonna do my best though. Also, this is not going to be my normal, happy, chipper video. If you can't tell by the intro, title, or thumbnail, we are going to Auschwitz and we're talking about babies. So let this be your one and only massive trigger warning and content warning. I don't go into a great amount of detail, but I go into detail because these innocent people's and babies' stories and the hell they endured deserves to be told in its entirety in as much detail as I can do without hopefully getting a content blockage warning on this video. I don't blame you if you don't want to learn about Auschwitz and babies today. I don't blame you. However, I encourage you to watch this because this is a story of determination and hope like no other. And it's just absolutely insane. Stanisława Leszczyńska was born on May 8th, 1968 in Lodz, Poland.
Loads.
Łódź.
It's either Łódź or Lodz. I might say Lodz. I'm gonna do my best. Now that I have her name out of the way, I'm going to be calling her Stanny from now on because I am not going to attempt to say her full name because I know for a fact as I get into this video, I will begin to butcher it. Stanisława is Stanny now. Let's get into it. She was the firstborn into a working-class Polish Catholic family. Her father, young Leszczyński, worked as a carpenter and her mother was named Henryka. During this time, Poland was under Russian rule. Due to this, we don't know much about her childhood, but what we do know is that it was a hard upbringing. Her father was forced to fight for the Russian Imperial Army at some point for 5 years, while her mother, having to make ends meet, worked in a factory for 12 hours a day. Despite these hardships, her mother's hard work made it possible for Stanny to attend a private school. When her father returned home, they got out of there in a half and moved to Brazil in 1908, seeking better economic opportunities. They settled in Rio, Brazil for the next 2 years. Now I couldn't find why, but in 1910, when Stanny was 14, the family moved back to Lodz. Stanny finished high school in 1914 just as World War I started. So obviously, once again, her father was drafted into the army. While the war was going on, which remember was still bad. I mean, not as bad as the second one, but still bad. Not World War II bad, but bad. Anyway, I say all that because even though World War I was raging, Stanny was able to live a pretty decent life given the environment. Remember, Russia wasn't on the bad side of World War I. They were the good guys along with America, France, Britain, Italy, and Japan in Part 1. So the countries under Russian rule remained relatively unscathed. During the war, Stanny lived in Lodz with her mother and 2 younger brothers. She married Stanisława Leszczyńska on October 17, 1960 1916. Then she gave birth to their first child, a son, in 1917, named after his father. 2 years later, they had a daughter they named Sylvia in 1919. In 1920, Stanny and her family moved to Warsaw, Poland, where she enrolled at a midwife school. Now, this was unusual for the average married Warsaw woman with children, as she had to leave her home and children to attend school. Her sacrifice paid off when she graduated with an Alumni Achievement Award and full honors in 1922. After graduating, she went to a church, knelt down, and dedicated her midwife work to the Blessed Mother, also known as the Virgin Mary, Mother of Baby Jesus, Holy Virgin, Queen of Heaven, and Theotokos, a Greek term used in Eastern Christianity, vowing that if she ever lost a baby, she would give up being a midwife. Remember that vow. This vow, determination, and desire to become a midwife can be traced back to when she had her first son. He was basically a miracle baby who barely survived childbirth. This profound experience sparked something inside Stanny, making her wonder if she could help other women and babies in similar situations. She was just genuinely a good freaking person and wanted to help others. You want to know who she is? That was what she was. She was just a good freaking human being and wanted to help others. Now, before we continue, let me give you a little education on midwives. And trust me, this is fascinating. Every woman and some men know that a midwife is a healthcare professional that cares for mothers and newborns during pregnancy, helps with childbirth, and the postpartum period. For men, that translates to after the thing is out of us. You see them in hospitals, and some are skilled enough to handle births independently without needing a doctor. However, when it comes to childbirth, most people associate midwives with home births. Midwifery goes back a freaking millennia and was mainly practiced by experienced mothers, with older female relatives often helping deliver babies. It has existed in all cultures all over the world and dates back to ancient Egypt. In Egypt, midwifery was actually seen as a female occupation and even appears on papyruses dating back to 1900 BCE, which, just so you know, is really freaking old. Midwifery was both mentioned and revered in the Roman Empire, ancient Greece, medieval times, Europe, China, Africa, Thailand, even the Bible mentions it. It appears in the book of Genesis when two midwives refused the Pharaoh's order to kill all Hebrew newborn boys. And of course, we now know that a midwife helped Mary deliver baby Jesus. Midwifery can even be traced as far back as the Paleolithic era in 40,000 BC, aka the Stone Age, aka the people in Ice Age. I love that movie. Nah. From 3500 BC to 300 BC, the Egyptians and Greco-Romans made tremendous advances in midwifery development, knowledge, science, anatomy, and even payment systems. However, in late 300 BC, social attitudes changed about female midwives, and it became a profession under the hierarchy of male-supervised medicine, which historically has never gone wrong for women. Did you know that the chainsaw was originally invented for childbirth? Yep, in 1785, two Scottish doctor dudes invented it, and it was specifically designed to make removing a woman's pelvic bone easier and reducing birthing time, because, you know, men's got stuff to do. Mind you, this was an effort to improve, and I'm going to try to say this correctly, symphysiotomy, a surgery that helps widen the pelvis and vagina for childbirth. Doing this research on the invention of the chainsaw, I know a little bit too much about childbirth than I would have liked to have known, and I am traumatized. I'm gonna take a chainsaw to what? No! So why inventing what later became known as the Aitken's flexible chainsaw seemed like a good idea? Humans and men's brains, I guess. When the biblical era came around from 2200 BC to 1700 BC, women became empowered again and played a role in building the midwifery profession. But when the High Middle Ages arrived from 1000 to 1250 AD, female midwives were seen as heretics or witches. So of course, they were either hanged or burned to death. Luckily, all that is in the past, and over the last 100 years, there's been tremendous progress made for women, childbirth, newborns, and families all over the world, and improvements continue to this day. In fact, you might know somebody who had a home birth. My hairdresser had a home birth, and she had a midwife there, and her midwife was extraordinary, according to her. Now that you have the basics of what a midwife is, back to Stani. After Stani graduated and made her vow, she, her husband, and children moved back to Lodz in late 1922. She got a job as a midwife, and that same year gave birth to Stanisława, her second son. I hope I said that correctly. The following year, she had her third son, Henrik, in 1923. They lived in a mainly Jewish neighborhood where she and her children spoke Yiddish. She had many Jewish friends, most of her patients were Jewish, and she even visited synagogues regularly to pray and would invite rabbis to her home for meals and spirited debates. Again, Stani was just someone who simply wanted to help and give back to her community. She offered space in the family home to several impoverished families, both Jewish and Christian, and at crazy low prices. She was just a good freaking person. However, all of this would be unbelievably challenged in 1939. On September 1st, 1939, German troops invaded Poland, kicking off the bloodiest war in human history. World War II had officially begun. 16 days later, Soviet troops invaded Poland from the east, while Germany attacked from the west. Poland was boxed in and quickly fell to German occupation. The region was renamed Lichtenstadt and annexed to the Third Reich. Overnight, Stani went from living in a free state to living in an occupied war zone. One thing to know about Poland at this time is that it was home to the largest Jewish population in Europe. Lodz having the second largest Jewish population in Poland, right behind Warsaw, whose Jewish population made up 1/3 of the entire city's population. Since there were many Jews in Lodz, the city became a ghetto, which was basically a corral to hold the people, but mainly to separate what they called the Jewish filth from the Germans. The Lodz ghetto became the second largest ghetto in all of German-occupied Europe, with the Warsaw ghetto being the largest. According to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, German-occupied and annexed Poland and Soviet Union contained at least 1,000 so-called closed ghettos, which were areas that were literally walled off with barbed wire fences running through the middle of random streets, and the Jewish people were forbidden to leave. The city's Polish and German residents were thrown out of their homes to make room for German occupiers. The Lodz ghetto was built and its gates were closed and locked on April 30th, 1940, cramming all 163,777 residents into a mere 1.5-mile stretch of city. Stani and her family were among those forced into the ghetto. One thing you have to understand about these ghettos is that they were truly nightmarish. If you've ever seen The Pianist, when the main character's family is crammed into the ghetto and the conditions in the movies, that is not far off from what Stani's family had to deal with. The conditions were just disgusting. The people were forced to work for virtually no pay, and the average person's calorie intake was just 1,000 to 1,200 calories per day, causing widespread starvation. It was simply horrendous. However, despite these awful conditions, Stani, being who she is, couldn't just sit around twiddling her thumbs. So she, along with her family, but particularly her daughter, smuggled food to the starving and delivered falsified papers to Jews that were forged by her husband and father-in-law. They were managing fairly well, but unfortunately one day, Stani was caught red-handed, either by herself with 3 of her children, her daughter and 2 youngest sons, all of whom were in their 20s by this point, or just with her daughter. The details aren't entirely clear. They were arrested, taken to the Gestapo on February 18th, 1942, and interrogated. Luckily, her husband and oldest son were able to avoid capture and fled the city and, bafflingly, went to Warsaw. I couldn't find entirely why. Stanny would never see her husband again, as he was unfortunately killed during the Warsaw Uprising in 1944, 18 months later. Her eldest son, on the other hand, managed to evade capture and somehow survived the war. Unfortunately, Stanny's two youngest sons were sent to the Mauthausen concentration camp in Austria, which was a stone quarry slave labor camp where over 90,000 people would die. Stanny and her daughter Sylvia, on the other hand, were taken to a different concentration camp, specifically Auschwitz, where for the next nearly 2 years of Stanny's life, Stanny was no longer Stanisława Leszczyńska, but prisoner number 41355, while her daughter Sylvia became number 41336. Okay. If you've never heard of or don't know what Auschwitz is, I cannot express my thoughts and feelings about that without getting severely canceled on YouTube. Very briefly, and I mean very briefly, Auschwitz, also known as Auschwitz-Birkenau, was the most destructive concentration and extermination camp the Nazis built. This place was the pinnacle for the Nazis' final solution to the Jewish question. That term basically translates to their plan to make the Jewish people completely extinct. Auschwitz housed a total of at least 1.3 million men, women, and children, and consisted of, believe it or not 2, but 3 camps: Auschwitz I, Auschwitz II Birkenau, and Auschwitz III Monowitz. Auschwitz I is where that infamous gate resides and served as the camp's main headquarters. Auschwitz II is where the iconic train entrance stands, which has become the main symbol for both Auschwitz and the Holocaust. It functioned as a concentration and extermination camp with gas chambers, and Auschwitz III operated as a labor camp. However, no matter which one you went to, Auschwitz was hell on earth. In the forced labor camp, prisoners mined coal, worked in quarries, performed construction, dug tunnels and trenches, shoveled snow, and cleared rubble after air raids. They were forced to produce weapons and other goods for the war effort. And get this, many private companies exploited these unjustly imprisoned people to produce plane engines and cars. What brand of cars, you may ask? Bavarian Motor Works, better known as BMW. Auschwitz was also a place of unheard of, unbelievably crude, awful, disgusting medical experiments conducted by SS officer and physician, if you even want to call him that, Joseph Mengele, most famously known as the Angel of Death. You mainly might know him and his experiments of twins. If you don't, you can Google that horror show yourself. I'm already going to get depressing and deep here. But what Auschwitz is most famously known for is for the sheer amount of innocent people killed. Historians estimate that in at least 5 years, 1.1 million people were murdered at Auschwitz, 1 million of those being Jewish people. Some died from starvation, disease, or being shot, but most were horrifically gassed in the camp's gas chambers. The bodies of the men, women, and children were then transported to the ovens or the crematorium to be cremated. The ashes were then dumped into rivers, nearby ponds, or sprinkled into fields as fertilizer or used as landfill to even out the ground. Now, quick side note, I have been to Auschwitz, and when I tell you, you're just in the parking lot and you just feel like snakes of darkness coming up through your veins and your skin, and then when you go under that gate, oh, and what the museum does a great job of, besides, it's still standing, they have encased in glass rooms filled with the people's suitcases. There was a room full of glasses, room full of shoes, room full of just the hair. Because when they got there, they cut off their hair. I'm just getting chills just thinking about it. You walk and you're able to walk into a gas chamber And I was able to see the ovens too. In my mind, it should be a requirement before you die that every human needs to go to Auschwitz in order to be recognized as a human, so that then we make sure that something like that doesn't raise its disgusting head again. Anyway, I'm off my soapbox. If you've ever seen Schindler's List, which you haven't, please for the love of God do. Like, if you haven't, who are you? The scene when Jews arrive at the camp is fairly close to what Stanny and her daughter experienced when they first arrived. In all the chaos of guards shouting, music being played, because if you didn't know, Nazis were at least nice enough to play music to help calm people down. At least they're that nice. Kids are screaming from being separated from their parents, and people are just screaming as they're being sorted for reasons they don't understand. Stanny was somehow able to keep her wits about her and risked her life by walking up to a guard and presenting him with her midwife credentials. Now, I say that this is insane because, again, at these camps, Auschwitz, Dachau, all of them, people were just shot for no reason at all. And so the fact that then this guard, who she walked up to and basically shoved her papers into his face, did not kill her on the spot? Miracle, 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 miracle. So after seeing her credentials, he sent her to work in the camp's maternity ward. Now, when I first stumbled on her story, I thought, gosh, even midwives were sent to Auschwitz, and I'm sure killed too. Like, just another layer of just, ugh. But then I saw the word delivered, and I literally went, of course there were women at Auschwitz who arrived pregnant or got pregnant and had babies at freaking Auschwitz. Of freaking course there was. Whole new world of depravity unlocked. Oh my gosh. You see why Stanny went up to the top of my list now? Yeah. Now, when you think of a maternity ward, you picture a clean, equipped, hopefully safe-feeling place, right? Well, imagine the exact opposite of that, and you have kind of an idea of what a maternity ward looks like at Auschwitz. I'm not laughing because it's funny. I'm laughing because it's freaking insane. It was just a couple of filthy barracks with no sterilization, no soap, barely any blankets. It stunk. It was freezing cold. Until 1943, most pregnant women who arrived at Auschwitz or who were already at Auschwitz and were later found to be pregnant were sent to the gas chambers or executed or were given forced abortions, mainly by Dr. Gisela Pearl, who was a good person. She decided to do these forced abortions because when she learned that pregnant women were sent to the gas chambers, she carried out these forced abortions because she wanted to save the lives of the pregnant women. And even though she was a conservative religious woman and an infertility specialist, she knew that this was the right thing to do. Others were sent to the maternity ward, and I'm going to keep calling it a maternity ward because it's not a maternity ward in the basics of what that term is, to wait out the rest of their pregnancy, where after they gave birth, a midwife known as Sister Clara, along with a woman called Sister Fanny, both of whom oversaw the maternity barracks and had to ensure that these babies didn't survive, they would murder them. Now, I'm not going to go into the amount of detail that I unfortunately went to about what they did to these babies. I mean, you know what the Holocaust is. You use your imagination. However, the most detail I'm going to go into, because again, these innocent souls deserve to be told what happened to them. How some of the babies were killed was by drowning them in a barrel. Now, you might be asking, these women, where's their moral compass? In my mind, there was no such thing as a moral compass in World War II. However, what you need to remember is that if these two women didn't kill these babies, they would be breaking the law. Because in the final solution document that about 90 Nazis signed, including Hitler himself, they had signed the death sentence for over 6 million Jewish people. Survivor Zofia Rentrinska, who was a pharmacist, describes the nightmare of mothers giving birth at the camp. Quote, I remember prison numbers being tattooed on their delicate little bodies, only to send them to be gassed next day or to condemn to death by starvation. When Stani presented herself as a midwife, she met Joseph Mengele, the angel of death himself. She met that guy. Not on my bucket list of somebody to meet, alive or dead. Not on my bucket list. No. Who made it very clear that she was to kill any and all newborn babies. Now remember, Stani had made that sacred vow to the Blessed Mother to ensure every infant born in her care survived, and if one didn't, she would give up her midwifery. And now to be ordered, no, forced to kill infants? I can't even imagine what went through her head. To Death's face, which I'm going to call him that from now on because that is literally what he is. She refused. Remember that part. She was taken to the ward where the head doctor repeated the same order, and yet again, Stani refused. Stani was assigned to 3 different blocks or barracks, specifically Block 17, or as Death lovingly called it, Erhohonseblock, or the Recovery Block, where in reality, it was filled with women prisoners infected with typhoid fever, malaria, epidemic typhus, pemphigus, and it was where the women gave birth. In these conditions, with these diseases, and large cat-sized rats all around them. Just sick. Stani recalls, quote, in the barrack, there were infections, stench of sick bodies, and every kind of bug crawling around bodies. The barrack was infested with rats, which were biting off noses, ears, fingers, and feet of exhausted and very sick women who were too sick to move. Yeah, I told you I was going to go into some detail. I told you. But trust me when I say, what I'm saying here, tame compared to other stuff I found. Stani became a role model for the young prisoners, mainly because she was, you know, patient, nice, kind, trying to not find any excuse to kill them, person, had a soul at least. I would like that person too. Numerous survivors described Stani as their rock. She was calm, smiled, very religious, modest, serene, but mainly hardworking and smart. She was very creative in finding workarounds to provide the mothers and babies she successfully delivered with basic necessities. You know, like blankets, bandages, racks for diapers, herbs for drinking and bathing, boiled water, bowls, water, you know, stuff like that. And yes, you heard me right. Stani was able to successfully, I'm going to say that again, successfully deliver babies at Auschwitz under the most insane conditions. She successfully delivered babies under all those conditions. She was professional, experienced, and able to calm down the, I cannot even imagine, utterly terrified mothers as she brought children alive into the world, in complete defiance of death's orders and the whole purpose of what Auschwitz was built for. And get this. Oh, yo, Stani, who's delivering babies, again, with the typhoid, with the lice, with the malaria, with the rats, with the bugs, with the cold, with the all conditions that should not be happening. Stani delivered babies with no infections, no postpartum fever, and no complications. Not a single infant died in her care, either before or during birth. Quote, one time, Lagarat asked me to prepare a statistic about infections during deliveries and a death rate for infants and mothers. I answered to him that I had never had a single case of death either for newborn or for mothers. Lagarat looked at me in disbelief. Even the most sophisticated German clinics at universities, he said, could not claim such a success rate. In his eyes, I saw hate and jealousy. Lagarat is a term for a chief medical officer or a camp doctor. Stanny worked day and night for weeks on end with barely no sleep, and she did it all on her own because the other midwives sure as heck wasn't going to help her. Oh, and her tools? Oh, you're not ready for this. A very limited amount of cellulose fiber tissues, a thing used for wound dressing, some bandages, a bowl of water, which took 20 minutes to fetch, and she was basically the only one allowed to fetch water freely, a kidney basin with a solution of potassium permanganate for wound care, the mother, and a small pair of scissors. And it wasn't these kinds of scissors. Oh no. No, more like the kind of scissors you use to cut your cuticles. Delivering babies. Not with this. With this. Can't. I can't. I cannot. I cannot. Stanny would deliver the baby, wrap it up, baptize the infant, and then the mother would name her newborn who came into this world as a prisoner. In the hell of Auschwitz-Birkenau, Stanny brought in new life and, dare I say, the tiniest bit of hope. Remember how Stanny refused to follow the order to kill these babies? Well, because of that, she was threatened and severely beaten for her rebellious actions, and was even the victim of one of death's experiments meant to force her into submission. The experiment? Well, she was given an infection filled with spotted typhoid fever, which I guess because you become delirious with it, it would put her into delirium and a weird conscious state of mind, and that would make her more submissive. I don't get the point. I don't get the point of any of this. I don't understand it. I don't understand it. And I'm not going to try and dissect that mindset. I can't. And I want to say that that happened after she refused death's orders once again and stood up to him saying, quote, no, never, children cannot be killed. Stood up to death and said, nope. I don't know how she did that. Now, I know this is morbid. I was thinking it. I'm sure you are thinking it. Why didn't they just kill her? Why didn't they just kill her? Honestly, I have no idea. I truly have no idea. I couldn't find the reason why. We might get a little bit of an answer as we get into the end of the story. I don't know why they didn't just kill her, especially given the fact that she's mainly helping Jewish women give birth to Jewish babies. But she just gave death the middle finger and kept delivering babies and would then give them to their mothers, which, remind you, wasn't a thing because when the mothers gave birth to the babies, the mothers didn't even see the babies, much less able to hold them, because they were then taken to be killed. Was just the way it was there. In the 30-bed barracks, she had an average of 4 births a day during her 2 years at Auschwitz. Stanny was sometimes helped by her daughter and other physicians at the camp, but she served as the main midwife and doctor most of the time. Even though she delivered the babies alive, most didn't last long. They were either later killed by Carla and or Fanny, if I'm mispronouncing their names, I do not care, or died from disease, the cold, or starvation. Why starvation? Because, and I need you to take a very deep breath, brace yourself, because this is really hard to hear. Their mothers were not allowed, forbidden in fact, to breastfeed them. Plus, most of the time, the mothers were so malnourished themselves that they simply couldn't produce breast milk. Quote, Women's breasts, dried by starvation, annoyed newborns' lips, creating a hopeless sucking motion which only deepened their starvation. Stanny tried her best to not notice these tragedies, though I can't imagine how helpless she must have felt. But she kept going, and honestly, I think that's all she could do. She empathized with the other prisoners and loved them deeply. Quote, "This is what made me stronger every day and every night I spent on strenuous work. The toil and sacrifice being just an expression of my love for the little children and their mothers, whose lives I tried to save at all cost. Otherwise, I would not have been able to survive." Because of her refusal to give up hope, the women in the barracks, and I would really like to think the mothers and other women in the camp, nicknamed her Mother. And reportedly, even Death himself started to call her that and began to give her the tiniest, minuscule, microscopic bit of respect. By the time Auschwitz-Birkenau was liberated 2 years after her arrival, Stanny had successfully delivered 3,000 babies. Let that number sink in. 3,000 babies in Auschwitz during the genocide of innocent Jewish people for no justifiable reason at all, in deplorable conditions, again with cat-sized rats, typhoid, malaria. 3,000 babies were successfully born, once again with no kind of infections, diseases, or complications. Tragically, unfortunately, of those 3,000 births, 1,500 were murdered and 1,000 died from starvation or exposure to the cold. And this is where I think this is why they didn't morbidly kill Stanny for what she was doing. About 500 of those babies that were born with blue eyes and blonde hair were sent to live away with other families and to be Germanized. This was actually a thing. Around 200,000 children were kidnapped, mainly from Auschwitz. Why did the Nazis do this? Hitler and his followers somehow believed that these children had Aryan/Nordic traits, supposedly making them descendants of German settlers who had immigrated to Poland. They basically made this whole thing up. Remember, the ideal German is blue-eyed blonde hair. So why do some Poles, which remember is an inferior race to them, look like the ideal German? Well, because they're obviously descendants. So in their mind, they're not stealing or kidnapping the kids, but are merely relocating or reclaiming lost blood to the fatherland. How that works, I have no idea. These blonde hair, blue-eyed babies taken from mothers were labeled as racially valuable, which is why they were forcibly, however that word is said, adopted into German families. On the miraculous side, of those 3,000 babies Stanny delivered, 30 survived along with their mothers when the camp was liberated. When it became clear the Nazis would be defeated and Soviet forces were approaching Auschwitz, 60,000 prisoners were forced to evacuate on death marches. About 15,000 died from starvation, exposure to cold, or were simply shot by SS guards when they couldn't keep up. Stanny, however, refused to leave, staying behind with those too ill or too close to death to march. When the camp was liberated on January 26, 1945, of the 13 million people sent to Auschwitz, only 7,000 remained alive to be freed. Somehow, Stanny and her daughter were among those survivors. Stanny stayed at Auschwitz another week after its liberation to continue caring for the ill, but this time she actually had some help from the Allied Army, which must have been really freaking nice. On February 2nd, 1945, Stanny and her daughter Sylvia finally left Auschwitz, never to return or look back. Though they left Auschwitz, Auschwitz never fully left them. They headed straight for a church where Stanny could receive her long overdue sacraments. I don't like that word. Unbelievably, there we go, Stani and her daughter reunited with Stani's parents and 3 sons, the one who had escaped and the 2 who were sent to the labor camp and had somehow survived their own hell. It was then that Stani learned of her husband's fate. They mourned his loss, but they were alive, something that would have made him extremely happy. So off they went, together and free. After the war, the family returned to Lodz. There, Stani's 3 older children followed in their mother's footsteps, going to medical school, earning degrees, and becoming physicians, while her youngest son studied law and music. Stani continued working as a midwife, serving the women and children in her community while living a humble and quiet life. I would freaking hope so. She attended mass daily and was rarely seen without a rosary in hand, except, of course, when she was delivering babies. She lived with her daughter Sylvia and her grandchildren. She sang with her family, gave fashion advice to friends, which I would have loved to have known what that was, and kept her home always filled with music, especially when her youngest son Henrik, the one who became a lawyer and composer, came to visit. About 20 years after the liberation of Auschwitz in 1965, Stani presented her midwife report, a very vivid account of her time and experiences in Auschwitz, called the Report of a Midwife from Auschwitz. It revealed the atrocities done to mothers and their babies during the Holocaust. I will leave a link to the document if you would like to read it, but be forewarned, it's a very hard read. Stani does not hold back, and all of the quotes and many of the visions that I have shared are from her report. Now, this is not to be confused with the book The Midwife of Auschwitz by Anna Stewart, which is still a great and true story, but is not Stani's actual report. Stani worked as a midwife for the next 40 years until 1958, when she retired due to her age and deteriorating health. Before and after publishing her report, Stani willingly told whoever asked about her experiences at the Auschwitz maternity ward. Stani says she never forgot what her and the prisoners' main goal was. Quote, "Among those horrible memories, there is one main thought coming back to me all the time. All children were born alive. Their goal was to stay alive." On January 20th, 1970, she attended a celebration in Warsaw where she was able to meet some of the survivors, including some of the women and their grown children whom she had helped deliver. She said it was one of the happiest days of her life to see the light of hope she gave in the darkness of genocide. Stanisława Leszczyńska died on March 11th, 1974 of intestinal cancer at the age of 77. Her funeral was attended by loved ones and thousands of others, from Jewish neighbors to Auschwitz survivors to the mothers and children she had delivered. She was buried in a Franciscan habit, a religious garment worn by a member of the Franciscan order. It symbolizes humility, commitment to poverty, and simplicity. Though she put on a brave face for the rest of her days, Auschwitz changed her, as it did the world. She wasn't as cheerful as she once was, fighting daily to find joy. Though more stern, quieter, withdrawn, and less warm, she remained kind and loving. She fed birds, talked to flowers, and cherished her children and grandchildren. She was different, but still herself. She loved cooking and prepared lots of food, having experienced the unconscionable hunger in Auschwitz. She was very strict about wasting food, as anyone would be, and they have every right to be. Yeah, she talked about her experiences, but mostly she kept most of her memories to herself. But there were glimpses. Once her grandson was playing Silent Night on the piano. Totally innocent, great, beautiful song. But Stani froze in place when she heard it. She asked, I would think more like told him, to play something else. You see, Silent Night has been sung a lot during wartime as a symbol of hope and peace. It was sung during the World War I Christmas truce and by prisoners of war to calm themselves. However, during World War II, the Nazis adapted the song to praise Hitler. Now, this was, of course, completely by design. Christmas celebrates Jesus. Jesus was a Jew. It's not hard to connect these dots. You picking up what I'm putting down here? Okay, cool. So it's not hard to imagine that the Nazi version of Silent Night was sung at Auschwitz to torment prisoners, and that that song is seared into her mind, and that it dug up really bad memories for Stanny. She truly suffered in silence, but as always, kept going. Several hospitals and organizations throughout Poland have been named after Stanny. In my mind, one of the best things named in her honor, the main road leading to the memorial and museum Auschwitz-Birkenau, aka Auschwitz I itself, that road that leads to the literal gates of hell bears her name, which means when I went to Auschwitz and was driving to the main museum, I was on that road named after her. And here I am doing a story about her. That is some cosmic crap right there. I don't care what you say. I don't care who you are. That is cosmic. That is a full circle if I've ever heard it. Stanny somehow isn't a saint yet in the Catholic Church. Though she has this really pretty stained glass portrait of her, she's not a saint, but she has been nominated, and her beatification process, which declares a deceased person blessed and is the second to last step in becoming a saint, was opened in 2015. That had better be expedited. Overnight ship that thing. Stanny isn't as well known as the angel of death, but she was his exact opposite. She brought life when he took it. She was the light when darkness and death surrounded everything. As a midwife for 38 to 40 years, she never lost a baby or mother during delivery. She literally stood in front of death and said no when it was actively surrounding her. I'll end her story with her own words from the conclusion of her report. Quote, "If in my country, contrary to our war experiences, there would be forces directed against the life of a child, I do trust that there will be the voice of all midwives, the voice of all honest mothers and fathers, and the voice of all honest citizens, the voice supporting the life of children. In the concentration camp, all children against all odds were born alive, beautiful, and chubby. The nature against all hate was fighting for its rights with unknown force of life. The nature is a teacher of a midwife. Together they fight for life, and together they cherish the most beautiful thing in this world, the smile of a child." Okay, there you go. The absolutely insane story of the midwife of Auschwitz. Yes, this is my darkest story that I have covered. I just need to make this one plea to anybody who comes across this video. If you have the unbelievably enormous audacity to comment that the Holocaust wasn't real, or that this story is boring, or that this is not important, I don't want you here. Even though we have unbelievably unconscionable levels of evidence that the Holocaust was 100% real. If you dare say in my comments, the Holocaust isn't real, or Stanny's story is not important, your comment will be deleted and you will be blocked. I do not care. I do not care. And if I lose followers or subscribers because of this thought and this policy that I am putting in, I don't care. This is where I'm drawing the line. Holocaust fake news, you're not welcome here. Do not come back. With that, if you learned something today, and I surely hope you did, and have a bit of inspiration and some hope, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. And while you're down there, please leave a very kind, friendly, mindful, very demure comment. I will be back with my next video, and it's going to be a lot more on par with how this channel is. I'm going to go and watch a Disney movie and pet my cat. I'm gonna go off and do that. But until then, do not be well behaved. You just might make history. See you next time, gals and guys.